I find that people who are nerds about malleable software want to build the platform or the thing to rule it all. For me, I think the motivation is much closer to how can I wake up more people to the idea that just the world around them is malleable.
Hello, I'm Mary. I'm a software engineer at Notion.
Hey, I'm Jeffrey. I do design and engineering here.
Hi, I'm Slim. I'm a research scientist.
I'm Max. I support our product and design teams here at Notion.
What's your earliest memory using a computer and maybe realizing that you could do more?
Actually, I prepared my answer for this one, so I can go first if you like, break the ice. When I grew up, my parents had a Mac in the 90s, and there was a program called ResEdit where you could open up an application on the computer, and it was part code, which was unreadable mostly, but then there was also what was called the resource fork, where it stored things like images and icons. So just to really fuck with my parents, I changed all the menu items on our Mac, and that was confusing for them for that day.
I had a very similar thing where for Windows, it was called Resource Hacker. And I had a friend who got suspended because he changed to like everything on the school software, and he was like changing icons and stuff.
I just made PowerPoints. Made a lot of PowerPoints.
For school?
No, for sport. I just made PowerPoint, like escape the room games.
What about you, Mix?
I think my early computer use was, well, these are sort of immutable things, and I put magic incantations in, load like a floppy disk, and then I can play the game that I wanted to play. And I really wanted one of those Macs, but they're so expensive. Then I realized, wait, you can just make your own. And also, why did macOS choose to have a dock and then Windows XP didn't? And like that really got me thinking. There's probably a group of people on the other side of this computer.
The software tool you love that you think is underrated?
God, that is such a hard question.
I'll start. There's a lot of little Mac utilities that I love, and they do such small things, but they make my day better every day. I use a screenshotting app called CleanShot, and you wouldn't think that screenshotting is like that big a deal, but if you're doing a lot of work, making prototypes and stuff, it's a criminally underrated tool.
That would have been my answer too, actually.
I stole yours.
I guess maybe I'll go with TL Draw. And lately, I like using TL Draw in combination with Claude Code. So you just do a quick TL Draw, take a screenshot, and then with Control V, paste it into Claude Code. And I'm like, hey, go build this.
I like KidPix. The preeminent pixel graphics, raster graphics application. The idea of just being able to stamp stuff on a canvas or draw or scribble unrestrictedly is very cool.
I wish there was an easier way to put stickers and scribbles onto software.
The physical world has so much variety, like you can tell naturally like, oh, that's a notebook that I've used and that one I've never used because that one is really wrinkled and dirty. And like in the physical world, I feel like or in the digital world, we end up with such carbon copies that we lose so much richness. And it'd be cool if we could bring back some of that. How about you, Mary?
Okay, there's this app called Castle. It's a iOS and Android app, and you use it to make video games. It's only on the phone, and there's also a distribution mechanism built in because it's a little kind of mini social network where your game will get put up if you want, and then other people will play it in the community. It really seems to have been embraced by people who care about expressing themselves, basically, I guess, through these games.
The way you talked about it reminds me of, I actually think the Instagram story editor is definitely the most used graphics editor in the world. So it's like my example of mass market, I don't know how many billions of users they have of malleable software. It's not quite malleable, and it's also weird because it's in a social network environment.
So much of wanting to make something is to share it with your friends or with the world, and when that's hard, it just crushes that loop. And so I feel like the best tools make that instant and easy and get that going.
I think it's kind of a shame that with the proliferation of more software abstractions for building web applications, say, but also on the desktop, you can't really just look and steal how people did something anymore. Bring back the source. As you introduce more tools to help people who are building things build richer and more elaborate abstractions, it's sort of unfortunate that the reverse part of that is that it's zero sum with making it easy for other people to see and emulate what you were doing as well.
Over the decades, the standards just keep getting higher and higher for what is good. Like in the 80s, if you could just do a black and white simple image on a fixed screen size, that was enough. And like that could match the state of the art in software. And now like, it's like, are you gonna work on mobile? There's so many things that you could add on. And I think it's like, people like making stuff that feels real and is like at the standard of what they use. And like that standard just keeps escalating. And so I think it's freeing when like, I mean, when you're in media that restrict you from going higher in production value, I think it can be really freeing. Like, you know, a tool like Notion or spreadsheets, like you share something and you can't do certain things. And that's nice because then other people feel like, oh, it's okay, I can do stuff too. You know, like spreadsheets are usually ugly, which is great because you don't feel like you're messing it up when you like start coloring cells. It's fine.
I wonder how vibe coding impacts this because I feel like it's so easy now to get to a mirage of something that is like, I don't know, the analogy that like you get this glossy magazine in the mail from something that you never signed up for. And you're like, well, clearly people worked on this. And I'm like, I'd rather you not send it because it goes right into recycle. But the production value of that is so high to some degree, and it's glossy and well printed, that you can't apply the judgment of is it actually good. And I think software is approaching that too, where it's pretty easy to make the first step. You just tell Cursor or whatever, hey, go do this thing. And then it looks very well made and produced, but you didn't build up any mental model of how you got there.
Yep.
And then at some point there is this exit and you're like, okay, now I don't understand anymore. You see the posts on Reddit, right? I'm like, oh, I vibe coded my startup and now it's been day 37. Can somebody tell me what Python is?
You've written about Malleable software. What does this phrase mean to you and why does it matter?
Yeah, so the way that I think about malleable software, I think environments really matter for people, whether it's where you live or where you do your work. And I think when you look at creative people who do great stuff, they often are really particular about creating the environment for themselves, whether that's, you know, the office environment with your team or like the studio and what sorts of stuff you put on the walls. And people are very particular about their tools. In the physical world, there's a lot of affordances we have to change our environments. There's a lot of flexibility built in just because physical reality kind of is all made of one thing. And then you go to software and all of a sudden it's like, wait, why are these developers off in California deciding every single detail of my environment that I spend all day in? This I think, is the problem that a lot of software is afflicted with. And what I see as malleability is like, how can we enable everyone who's trying to do their best work to edit their tools as they work to make the tools fit the way they want to work rather than the other way around. It just feels so like important to me that people have that ability in the digital world because that's where we spend a lot of our time now, you know?
How do you reconcile the idea of, say, a common protocol that would allow that kind of interoperability with the fact that common protocols frequently tether you to a lowest common denominator type constraint?
I think it's a really good question. It's like one of the biggest tensions. The best answer that I've been able to think of was I worked on a project at a previous job at this research lab called Ink and Switch, where we were thinking about, could you have interoperability with what's possible to interop, but then could you optionally upgrade to have parts that are not interoperable and kind of have it both ways? So like, you know, you could maybe have a plain text file, but then there's annotations on the plain text that can't be read by other things. But the things that can read them, you can layer those in. And so how could you have it be less all or nothing, but more like, yeah, the lowest common denominator is our baseline, and then we optionally opt into more and more compatibility as we can. I think that sort of wiggle room and like being able to fudge what you can share with across tools is ultimately the only realistic way to make progress while also retaining the ability for stuff to work together, I think.
Yeah, those like technological innovations, I guess, that sort of sometimes seem a little dry, actually can really be amazing upgrades to the experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a few like killer abstractions in the history of computing. Like the file system is a huge one. Like, and we've kind of moved past it now, and we've lost some of what was great about it. But like, when everything is just a file, you can do so much with that. You can share files across tools. You can pipe data between files. And even now, a lot of the AI software engineering stuff is based around this renaissance of like, oh hey, Claude Code can do anything with my files, so I'm just going to put everything in my files and work with that. And I think it's telling that, that is, despite the file system being kind of stuck in the pre-collaboration past, that it's still so good that people are getting mileage out of it to this day. I think we got to figure out what's the file system for the future, which is collaborative and serves that purpose in modern computing.
I wish more OS vendors took this idea seriously. We try within the Notion OS to do this, but I mean, the software world is bigger than Notion. There needs to be more.
Something that I feel like is really important with Notion that I've been really championing for a long time is we support all of these sort of lower fidelity things like to-do lists and so forth. We have all of these very complicated databases. It should be seamless. There should essentially be ways to, within one tool, go up and down this ladder of fidelity very easily. And I think that my biggest problem with a lot of software is that it caps out really quickly and sometimes tantalizingly it's almost there, right? It's like almost polished enough for you to ship it as is, but then actually you can't. And that's almost worse.
Well, I'm really excited I think AI has a huge role to play in smoothing these bridges, because one of the things it does best is take unstructured, messy stuff and automatically structure it in some way that you want to. This whole new world of the computer can come closer to meeting us where we are, where we want to express things messily, and then automatically bring it to computer interpretable land, rather than us having to go all the way into the structured representations ourselves. There's a paper, I think it's called Formality Considered Harmful, maybe, by Shipman and Marshall, that like talks about, they did a bunch of sort of thinking on like how people think and when you should introduce formality. And the basic idea is, the first thing you do when you think of an idea shouldn't be to open your filing cabinet and think about which drawer it's going to go in. That's like the wrong order, right?
Actually, I think a really shocking percentage of Notion feature development arose from someone being like, here's what would actually solve my precise use case, and then I'm just going to build this for myself. And then it turns out that ends up being both useful for other people, but also born out of a really organic context and seriousness of use.
I find that people who are nerds about malleable software want to build the platform or the thing to rule it all. For me, I think the motivation is much closer to how can I wake up more people to the idea that just the world around them is malleable.
And also, if you look at successful platforms for malleability, they always start from something. Like spreadsheets, it's just an accounting and finance thing, right? Oh, it turns out you can also plan a birthday party, but that wasn't really the point initially. Making a set of primitives for doing something real and solving one problem is more likely to solve a lot of problems than starting from solving everything.
It always felt like Steve Jobs was very good at sort of kind of building the phone he wanted, for sure, but at the same time he could sort of perceive what other people wanted too.
On one hand, I clearly believe that there are people that are very, very good at curating things for others, to your point, right? And there are domains in my life that I'm just not going to dedicate enough time to become an expert, and therefore I would like to rely on an expert. One of the reasons why physical metaphors often to me fall flat is, or as we're born, early childhood and so on, we build a world model of the physical world, and that does not translate to the software world. Lots of people have trouble using software. You can obviously always attribute malice, but I think a lot of times for the big platform vendors trying to put a little bit more safeguards in place is because they genuinely have many, many millions of people coming to them and saying, hey, I did this thing, I clicked the wrong thing, and now my family photos are gone. But I think it's much easier to judge in the physical world than it is in the software world. And so I very much struggle with how restrictive should you be, even though I'm like, wait, no, let me do everything. And so that's like a real struggle for me with malleable software and like the foot guns that you could theoretically build if you had complete control.
I've never been happier with a computing device than when I jailbroke my iPod Touch in 8th grade. And just put a bazillion tweaks that kept crashing the springboard.
You could imagine a society where it's like, oh, kitchen knives are dangerous, so we're not going to teach anyone how to use them. And in that society, it would be pretty dangerous for anyone to use them. And it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy thing, I think, where if we assume people are capable and can learn and can master tools, then they rise to the challenge. And if we don't, they don't. And I think the tool makers, if you always follow the users and assume they can't learn anything, it's sort of a downward spiral of incompetence. And like, that's sort of a sad world to live in, I think. And so I think as tool makers, there is sort of a bit of a responsibility to help bring people along to a world where they can learn to do stuff.
Since you're little, you kind of get taught and then you cut yourself and you're like, knife, careful, right? I don't think those exist for software. I don't think that people have an intuitive understanding of what a prompt injection is. I don't think people have an intuitive understanding of why they shouldn't click on the thing that looks like Google but isn't Google.
What made Notion really unique to me at first, when I first joined, and this was long before the current wave of AI frenzy and AI tools had taken over, was the idea of this block-based editor that is not only discrete in having separate components that can have fundamentally different forms or purposes, but it's also hierarchical, and in some cases it's a graph, because you can transclude trees or subtrees of content. Here you can link across. And to me, this was fundamentally a more compelling model than a lot of the text editors, word processors, productivity applications before, which either said, here is this free form, say, one-dimensional array of characters, which was like the Google Docs model, or even something like a spreadsheet, which is just, here's a equally free-form two-dimensional array of characters, you know? And the reality is a lot of the things that are tricky about understanding complex things is that there is a lot of internal structure that does not serialize nicely into this linear format, right? And so that, for me, was really compelling part of the original Notion vision, was that you could represent your data and your information in ways that are not just restricted to a list in 1 or 2 dimensions, but is really flexibly using blocks that have very distinct presentational forms. So you have all of this structure. And so that is actually also what makes me very excited about Notion and AI in conjunction.
You've obviously been at Notion for much longer than I have. This is month 5 or 6 for me. And I don't know if I would have joined Notion without AI. Mostly just because I wish I were, but I am not someone who naturally organizes a lot of things. Like, my spice rack is a mess and it's not like perfectly labeled and organized. But would I like an organized spice rack? Absolutely. And so to me, I don't know, Notion plus AI is sort of analogous to Memex, like the original dream of like you have information at your fingertips, you just ask a question. But then it's not just random information on the internet that has been SEO'd, or now like whatever the new term is for LLM optimization. It is data that I actually care about, so that when I then do ask the magic oracle, the data that comes back is actually mine, and I'm like, yep, that is exactly how I think about the world, right? So for me, it's the post-AI or era that makes it vastly more interesting.
I feel like there was a while where companies would say, if we've got the data, then we control whatever it is that they're trying to control. And it feels like Notion has the structured data, but it is personal data, and that's so much more valuable. One of the things that really stuck with me from A Small Matter of Programming, the book, was that Nadu, the author, said the most important thing for a tool, for it to be used, is for it to have stuff in it that people care about. In Minecraft, programming in Minecraft is a complete nightmare. It's so bad. It's like the world's worst programming interface. But Minecraft, people make stuff in Minecraft that they absolutely adore. Like, it's maybe their most special items in the digital world. And so they'll go through the hell of programming it. And so to me, where Notion sits in that is that we have this data that people have accumulated that they really, really, really care about. And now, instead of it being like hellacious Minecraft programming, we get to give them AI programming, which is actually really, really nice and fun and easy. And so I think like Notion is sitting at the pinnacle of the development of computing.
Wow.
Yeah. Mic drop. I think building on that, like, I think of Notion as a sort of modern HyperCard analog. What's beautiful about HyperCard is it's not a programming environment. It's a drawing environment, actually. You just draw stuff. It's kind of like KidPix, And if you want, you can take those things you drew and like make a script that makes it move or make buttons, but you don't have to. It's such a welcoming way to start. When you're not thinking about programming and behavior, you're just making stuff with directly, And I think that's something I love about Notion, especially relative to some other approaches these days for building software with AI, which is that, you could jump straight into like automated programming and coding UIs and stuff. But with Notion, you start from documents, right? You're just writing stuff and putting in images and adding stickers of Hello Kitty and Totoro or like whatever you want. It has that sort of fun, creative aspect that doesn't require doing any programming or behavior specification. And then once you get into it and you have some stuff that matters there and you want to level up into doing more sophisticated things, you can, but you don't have to. And I think that sort of document starting point, smooth ramp to do more is just like the most inviting way to bring people into computing. And so that's why I'm here.
Is this your subliminal way of saying that we should ship a draw block?
Draw block now.
What's one idea you can't stop thinking about right now?
I'm not sure how much I believe this general thesis that English is the new programming language, because a good programming language is not just about giving the CPU instructions. It's also this careful balance between precision of the instruction and concision so that, us mere mortals can read the code and understand what's going on. And at the same time, I don't know why, but like I'm not a huge subscriber to the visual programming language noodle diagrams. There's something that's like not appealing to me. So I'm trying to think about what would it look like if you had somewhat more structure for your prompts to sort of more reliably get really good results out of agentic, AI.
So this is a story about West Side Story. I like to work late in the office. I show up late and I leave late. And oftentimes when I'm really, really invested in what I'm currently working on, I get into this flow state where it's just impossible to tear myself away from the task, the computer or the sketchbook or something like that. All of a sudden, over the speakers on our expertly curated jazz playlist, there was a jazz combo arrangement that quoted melodically from Somewhere from West Side Story by Leonard Bernstein. West Side Story is maybe the greatest 20th century American composition, period. Like I think I'll go on the record as saying that. And so I was just like immediately so overwhelmed with. I was just verklempt, right? I was overwhelmed with emotion, with awe at the lyrical and the melodic genius, and it somehow busted straight through my late night, focused stupor. And I was just so overwhelmed that I immediately packed up and left. Bernstein subsequently tried to write all of this other serious music, and none of it is anywhere near as good as West Side Story is. And I feel like that's just a metaphor for creativity and the stuff that we build and not taking things too seriously. And if everything I do in my career flops, but I have one thing that's like anywhere close to as good as West Side Story is, I'll be really, really happy with that.
Some time ago, not long, maybe a few months ago, I realized I had started sleeping badly quite regularly. And it was truly like sort of not AI dread, but sort of more like AI awe, basically. If I spend 5% of tomorrow learning how to better use AI tools, then that 5% would probably be like, significantly more productive for the rest of my life or whatever. And it struck me that I'd spent, 25 years learning to program better. It made me like 0.0001% more productive. And I found that kind of dizzying. And it has felt like the greatest period of learning in my life. And then I decided to try and feel excited about it rather than sort of, dread, limiting it to this, maybe half an hour a day. And then get back actually making something.
I could listen to another 2 hours.